Yo, yo, yo! That's just for you guys. If you were here a couple weeks ago, Jeff Stoltz from Broken Chains was here, and he did that, and he scared all of us. And I think more than just my youngest had a full diaper that day. And so, well, I recently was doing some work up in Ormond Beach. Nice area. Not as good as Port Orange, but nice area. I'm just kidding, Peter. And when I was finishing, I had another appointment up in the Flagler Beach area. Do any of you do like I do when you have a chance to take so-called what is a long cut? You do that instead of the shortcut? Well, you know, it was just not long before Biketoberfest. I was like, I want to see how these roads are doing. And so I took the back way on the loop. And I'm going past, you know, the Tomoka State Park. And then I get to one that's like, Ormond's Tomb. I'm like, what in the world? There's a tomb out here? I've been through a bunch of countries, and there'll be some weird tombs you can stop. But I'm like, wow, we've got one here. So I pulled off. And can we all have that first slide? You come into this park-type area. And there's a bathroom and some parking. And you look back in there, and there's this ancient crypt, right? So I got my shovel out, not really. But I go up there, I'm like, man, there really is some sort of tomb type thing in this park. So I go on, and I'll go to the next slide. I get to this, James Ormond. And so let me tell you a little bit about James Ormond. Anybody know about him at all? James Ormond II, sorry, not the first. So it says he was prominent in civil affairs during the Seminole War of 1836, commanded a platoon of the Mosquito Roarers, that's a hard word, roarers, at the Battle of Dunlawton. Battle of Dunlawton, I was like, I know that word. And I looked into that, and I guess that was right here in Port Orange. So a good battle here, pretty much around where the sugar mill ruins are. Any of you been out there? Been out there, went with the kids, and there's some, Butch used to live out there? All right. And they got a thing called Bongo Land. Have you seen that? These fake old dinosaurs they've made. Anyway, it's interesting. James Ormond II, he fought here in the Port Orange area. Battle of Dunlawton, sugar mill ruins. We know these areas. But I look at his gravestone, and this was very, very interesting to me. I had to look up that history about him. I didn't know anything about this guy. But I get there and I look, I found out some generations before him. When I looked up his stuff, his dad was a sea captain, other things. But I didn't know anything about James Ormond II, this guy who has a whole city named after him, Ormond Beach. And it says one thing about him on his tombstone. I don't know if you can read it from there or not, but it says when he died, his name when he died, and then it says only this. An honest man. Man, that struck me. I just stood there by myself looking at this thing. I was like, I could feel God was, so it's been a sermon weeks in the making, even before I knew I was going to be preaching today. That God was stirring in me, who are you? How are you going to be remembered? And this guy I know nothing about, I automatically gained some respect for him as the people who knew him and knew him when he died, and they were in charge of making his tombstone. All they had to say about him was an honest man. Wow, what a great thing to be remembered by. What a legacy. And I was like, man, how am I going to be remembered? But then I started thinking about others. I mean, that is a great one-liner to describe you, just that you are an honest person. Well, there are some other people that we have some descriptions like that about in Scripture. I'm thankful that Pastor Garen talked about David last week. And how is David remembered? What did we say about him? Man after God's own heart, right? Clearly evident as we talked about David and his actions, right? David, that guy, man after God's own heart. Saw a nice looking woman bathing. So took her for himself. Got her pregnant. Couldn't get her husband to do the wrong thing, so put him in a position where he'd be killed. Oh, man after God's own heart, right? There's another guy. He used to hang out with Jesus. Peter. I didn't mean to look at you, Drew. I always call Drew. He's like the Peter I know. Don't take this personal. This has to do with the real Peter, not you. But Peter. Oh, he was a ball of fire, right? What do we know about Peter? Who did Jesus say Peter would be? He's the rock, man. The church is going to be built on this guy. What a great legacy. You know, you've got an honest man. You've got a man after God's own heart. You've got the rock. Not the rock, not Dwayne Johnson. But the other rock that the church was built on. Sorry, my wife's not in here to give me those looks. So, Peter. What happened when Jesus was confronted and Peter got a little angry? Chopped the dude's ear off, right? But even greater, this guy that the church was built on, when Jesus was taken, and people are like, hey, that guy Peter, he was with Jesus. What did Peter do? Not once, right? Not twice. 3 times. It's like, you guys crazy. I don't know who this Jesus guy is. Yeah, go get him, you know? The guy that the church was built on publicly, very openly denied that he had anything to do with Jesus. Well, there is another one. Paul, right? Paul the apostle. Like the apostle. I mean, who in the New Testament has influenced your faith, your walk, our theology, next to Jesus, more than Paul? I mean, this guy, he is the man. I mean, we often quote Paul as it's as relevant as just might as well be in red letters too sometimes, right? Well, Paul, his name was actually Saul. And what was Saul? He was the Pharisee of Pharisees. Might as well just say the persecutor of persecutors. This guy was bad. Paul, the one we hold up, he was about the worst one out there when it came to people who were following Jesus. There probably was nobody better at the time at getting Jesus' followers killed or in prison, right? This guy Paul we really look up to. If there was anyone that people like us should have and would have been afraid of back then, it was Saul/Paul. So I don't need to make this a long sermon today, so I'm going to try not to. But I want you to take a deep look into yourself. Quit thinking about anybody else right now except for yourself, okay? Who are you? As we've been talking about Peter, talking about David, talking about Saul, Paul. Who are you? How about this? Who were you? You have some dark stuff in your past? How about this? You have some dark stuff in your heart still today? I don't know you all that well, okay? I don't know your darkest secrets. I know there were probably some crazy stories. And if you hang out with Butch long enough, he'll just gladly tell you those crazy stories. I love you, Butch. That's why I love to pick on you. I love that you're just an open book, man. I do love it. But forget Butch's stories, okay? I know my stories. Even worse than that, I know my own heart. Thank God none of you can see that. As I look at who I am, who I've been, I'm no better than David. I am no better than Peter. I am no better than Saul/Paul. But I think that's okay. And there's only one reason that's okay, and you're probably getting where I'm going with this. But even if you aren't okay with who I've been, or even more so, if you're not okay with who you have been, and if you're still dealing with a lot of that, I know we all do. If you're not okay with who you've been, who you might be still today, if you were thinking that there are just some things about you that you or nobody else will ever get past, there's some pretty easy explaining I can tell you about that, and that is you're wrong. If you think that you cannot get past who you are and nobody will ever get past it, you are highly mistaken. I don't know much about James Orman II. I do know that others called him an honest man, and that was pretty cool. I mean, I'd be great if my kids will lie about me and put that on my gravestone. His lasting legacy on his tomb there is that he was honest. Somebody put that. David, as much as he went against God's will, I just want you to go through those stories again about David, the stuff we heard last week, the stuff I just talked about. As much as he did what my grandfather would have called, as much as he was a knucklehead. Anybody else get called that as a youngster? Or use that? He is known as a man after God's own heart. And you know who would probably say that before anyone else? God himself. Peter, head of the church, man. The Pope claims direct lineage in his position to Peter. I had a discussion with a Catholic friend recently who told me I wasn't part of the church because I didn't claim, I'm not a big Pope follower. I think he's a great guy. But Peter is still seen as like the rock, what you might call the greatest spiritual earthly authority we have, considered by many. The Pope claims direct lineage to Peter. Peter, the guy who openly denied Jesus multiple times at that moment of crisis. And we've got Saul. Saul, the Pharisee of Pharisees, the persecutor of persecutors, he was changed so much by Jesus that even his name changed. Any of you ever had that happen? I don't know if any of you in here were ever quite as nasty as Saul was as a person towards others. But he was so accepted and changed by God that you might as well have a name change, man. You are a completely different person. Have you been a God denier in both word and practice in your life? Have you? God loves people just like you. God has changed the world through people who denied God openly in both word and practice. As you sin against others, you deny God in practice. As you speak ill about God, others, whatever, you deny God. God has taken people just like that, transformed them in such a way that they became world changers for the sake of God. What's crazy about when God takes us and changes us is these things that are horrible, horrible practices, things from our past. You ever notice that God takes those things and somehow turns them into an asset? These horrible things have now become gain for the sake of Christ. The story that Jeff Stoltz told us a few weeks ago about his life. Some horrible stuff in there, right? What have those things become? They have become assets. They've become righteous weapons that he uses to win the battle for Jesus. What is it about your past or your present that seems like the greatest deficit, the greatest downfall of who you are? What is it that you're seeing in yourself right now? Because I'm telling you, Jesus wants to take that and turn it into the greatest asset you've ever had. Have you been like Saul? Have you been a crazy legalist where the rules of religion have ruled every single facet of your life and you used your perfection in living to the letter of religious law, where you just crushed others around you who weren't able to measure up to your righteousness? I know I've been there. It's crazy. I look at who I've been. I've been a guy who used legalism, my righteousness, my holiness, me not doing the bad stuff, to shame others that they weren't quite as good. And then turn the corner and there I am. I'm a God denier, not worrying about the consequences of sin. I have been both sides of the same coin. Now, I'm not going to say I'm any kind of world changer, but I know that God has been changing me. Taking the stupid things I've done, the selfish things I've done, the self-righteous things I've done, and turning those things into assets, into weapons to be used for His good. It comes down to this. There is a place for every single one of us. There is room at the table. There's room at the inn, in the house, in the family. No matter who you have been or who you are, there is room. There is a designated space just for you that's been reserved. So there's something that I really have been realizing I need to say, preach, embody a lot more. I have no problem telling people that they need Jesus in their life to be saved. But there's more than that. Jesus has called us all to be part of His mission. Every single one of us have been called to embody this. And I'll tell you, and I think I've said this up here before, there has been no greater thrill in my life than the adventure of serving with Jesus. I've been in some crazy places, driven some crazy stuff, done a lot of stupid things, and none of them have been like the thrill of when Jesus uses me to bring good news to others through word or deed. If that doesn't make sense to you, let's hang out at some point. Because there is nothing like being involved in the mission of building the kingdom of God. God has a plan and a mission for every single person in here today. Crazier than that, God has a plan and a mission for every single person out there as well. My wife kept me in check yesterday. We were going to walk around at Ponce Preserve. You've seen little boardwalks that go out to the riverside. It's pretty cool. Going out there with the boys. We stopped. The kids wanted some hot chocolate. It was a little chilly. It was in the low 70s. So it's hot chocolate time around here. And we stop at Circle K. A guy gets out, obviously a user of fine chemicals. And I said something to my wife and used a name that you often would call that kind of person. She kept me in check. And I realized, wow, I missed the point again. God has a plan and a mission for that very person right there. Instead of me saying something like, that guy's a meth head, I should have been saying, God has a plan and mission for that guy. I wonder if he wants to use me to share that message. Do not think that anybody out there has not been designed to be a part of God's plan and mission. They may not die with a grave marker that says an honest man. And as you get involved more and more in this plan, in this mission that God has called you to, there's a good possibility you'll never be remembered in a book for it. I'm sorry. There's a good possibility you'll never be on film remembered for living out this plan and this mission. But I got one better than that. The guy who created all this stuff, the omnipotent one, the all-knowing, the master of heaven and earth, I promise you, as you step into living out that mission, man, that guy is cracking a smile. And he is just so excited and thrilled that you are now going to be partaking in the good stuff that he planned for you all along. There's not one of us that is not called to this. I guess it comes down to this. There's nothing that God can't or won't forgive you of. Are you going to be healed of all physical ailments? Well, probably not. But is your heart going to be cleansed of all the stuff you feel guilty about? Oh, shoot, even the stuff that you don't feel guilty about that probably shouldn't be there. God is the great Redeemer, the great lover that we hardly understand. God not only forgives murderers, not only forgives great persecutors of faith, he not only forgives the great God deniers of this world, he takes them, he changes them through love like is hard to understand, and brings them along and says, I'm going to use you to be a world changer.